This happened about 5 years ago, back when I was going through hard times and was homeless. I used to live in Denver, CO, which is where this took place. There are several cemeteries in the Denver area, but there's one on the outskirts of Denver that's very large and very old. I think it may be the oldest one that's still being actively used. Before I became homeless, I didn't know much about this area. I had always gotten a creepy feeling around there, but didn't know why until I was on the streets. After that, I heard from many different people that it's got lots of underground tunnels, and some homeless people live in these tunnels. But in the deeper tunnels, there is cult activity. These tunnels have secret entrances all over the area, and the homeless that live around this area avoid some of these spider holes because people have been known to disappear near them, mostly women. This area has a river going through it, alongside the graveyard. One side of the river has a darker feel than the other. It's eerie over there, and smells like death. Anyways, one time, I was wandering the area with a few other acquaintances. We had nowhere to go, and decided to hang out in the abandoned part of the graveyard, the older side. It had just gotten dark and it was windy. It was also fall, so it was cold. We were huddled up against gravestones to block the wind. One of the people I was with knew the area better than me, and he had warned me to be very vigilant. I figured this was, so we didn't attract the attention of security or police or fellow homeless, but I later found out why he was so anxious about the area. It was probably around 1:00 p.m. We had sort of all been just sitting in silence, trying to stay warm, hoping the night passed quickly when I heard my acquaintance whisper, "Hey, heads up, keep quiet." I had already been quiet, but I immediately tensed up, assuming he spotted security or something. But as I looked around, I saw in the distance some small, flickering lights, appearing here and there all around the graveyard. It's like people had been spread all around the large graveyard, and they were all holding lighters that they flicked on, which only then showed they were all over. After my eyes adjusted a bit, I recognized they seemed to be candles. I looked harder, and could sort of see the outlines of people holding these candles. Jay whispered, "We gotta go." We clumsily started grabbing the few items we had around us. Jay came right up next to me and said, "Follow me, and don't look at them." I was thinking, WTF. Me and our other friend quickly started following Jay, moving at a quick walk straight to the break in the fence where we had come in. I was stupid enough to look behind me and saw the lights divided by figures continuing to appear all around us, and they were walking to the middle of the graveyard to stand in a circle. I passed by a few, and saw out of the corner of my eye they were wearing black cloaks. I could feel the menacing presence and stares, like they were daring me to look at them, but I had an overwhelming feeling that if we left them alone, that they would leave us alone. One thing that haunted me afterwards was the way they seemed to move towards the middle. They moved quickly and smoothly, like they were gliding and just seemed to morph out of the darkness. My instincts were on high alert. I knew whoever they were pure evil. We got the hell out of there, and once we got to the fence, we full-on sprinted for a few blocks. Jay didn't explain much. He just said to avoid those people, and don't look them in the eye, or they could have power over you. I definitely had gotten that feeling from the encounter. I asked why they weren't scared of cops or security, and he said basically that they got away with stuff. They did, because the authorities didn't want to risk looking into it, because they didn't want to be targeted. I don't know how true this is, but I do know what I saw and felt. I have had several scary experiences during my time in Denver, and some other stories about this area. So you guys let me know if you want more background or want to hear the other things I've experienced divided by heard about this area. Me and my fiance were planning a trip to Utah for about a month. It was kind of an impulsive decision, but she wanted to visit her dad's grave in Delta, Utah. We just returned back home to Colorado today. Looking back on the trip, nothing went right, and so many weird things happened. On the way to the Airbnb we booked in Manti, we saw many angel numbers. She's very spiritual, I'm a little skeptical. But everything felt normal for the most part. One thing I noticed was how many deer signs I saw, but I hadn't seen a single deer at all. Once we got to the Airbnb, I personally started to feel weird. I know that town is very Mormon, and I've never had any problem with them. I think everyone has a right to their own beliefs, and I respect it. But the way the town felt around the temple was eerie to say the least. While we're in the Airbnb, something felt off. She used her pendulum to try and talk to her dad, but a spirit wouldn't let her get through to anyone. This spirit was Mormon, and she told us to leave and we weren't welcome. I felt a gut-sinking feeling at this point, and I asked her to ask if me reading a portion of the Mormon Bible would make the spirit more comfortable with us staying there. She said yes, and I read a small bit before we left to get dinner. We decided to get Denny's right outside Manti. When we walked in, the servers kinda just stared at us for a good few minutes. Until I stared back for a while, that's when they decided to come and give us a table. I had a weird vibe from the people there, but I didn't make a fuss, because I'm sure we looked different, especially in a small town coming from Denver. Once we got our food, I almost immediately felt sick after eating. I took only 3 bites before feeling sick. I thought maybe it was because we had been on the road literally all day. But as soon as we got back to driving to the Airbnb, I threw up. We instantly chalked it up to car sickness, until I had my fiancée try a piece of my food, and she began to feel sick almost immediately as well. Yet her food was perfectly fine, and we got almost the exact same meal. We decided at that point not to eat out anymore and to use the money for food on groceries, so we left once more. We went to the nearest Walmart, and that experience was mostly normal besides the stares and weird glances we got. As we drove up to the Airbnb, my stomach began to sink again. I swear I saw what looked like a human face inside a bush next to the garage door. I felt a cold sweat, but we decided to go inside and just try to relax. Once we were inside again and getting ready for bed, we saw bugs over and over again. Almost like the cottage was infested with spiders and earwigs. At that point, my fiancé and I decided we had enough of that town, and we booked a hotel room for that night. It was around 11 p.m.-ish when we left, maybe a little earlier. The hotel was about 40 minutes away. The drive was all right at first until it took us to a dirt road with nothing at all around us. At this point, my mom had called us worried about us being out late in a foreign state. We stayed on the phone to calm our nerves. As we drove, a series of events played out. First, a black cat ran right across the road in front of our car. I was more freaked out about this because of that old saying on top of everything else that had happened that night. As we drove, there were no streetlights or signs, and my phone kept losing service, so we relied on Apple Maps to get us there. A little ways in, I saw a huge cow sitting on the side of the road just laying there. There wasn't a single other cow around him, or any other animal for that matter. And looking back on it now, I didn't see its eyes. The car lights didn't reflect his eyes, and he was really close. Almost seconds after, on the other side of the same road, I saw a giant white figure that almost resembled a horse, but the legs were too skinny, and it had no head, and it moved almost like it glided. Come to find out, my fiancé saw what looked like a man walking to our car as soon as we got on the dirt road, and didn't say anything because she was scared. I didn't say anything about the figure I saw either because I know speaking it out is a bad idea, especially at night, and I didn't want to scare my fiancé. Once we got to the hotel, the gut sinking was gone and we felt better. But I had a horrific nightmare about my mom dying and crawling around the ceiling like something out The Grudge. And when I woke up, my fiancé blamed the road for my dream. I think she was mostly joking, but I'm starting to think she was right. Even as I'm trying to write this out, I'm having problems with my keyboard lagging, or Reddit closing me out of it. I switched to my notes app to write this, but it makes it so much more eerie. This just happened a few days ago, so it's still fresh in my mind, but I wanted to share this because I wanted to know if anyone knows WTF happened that night, or if that town has something wrong with it, literally anything. 2 moons ago, I was making my tri-weekly McDonald's trip. My local McDonald's is like a second home to me. I know all the employees by name and love them dearly. I've even spilt a Big Mac with the manager before. I pulled into the almost empty parking lot and delicately maneuvered my automobile into my personal parking space. I shot a glance at my clock, which read 2:09. 2:09? I blurted out, that can't be right. I then remembered that the clock in my car was wrong. Depressed, I stuck my hand into my warm polyester pocket. My hand searched the abyss known as my pocket diligently. My heart was pounding at this point. I then felt it, the smooth silicone that is my phone case. I gripped it and quickly ripped it from my pocket. I turned it on and groaned in pain. It hurt my eyes to look within the glass rectangle. It was the brightest thing my mole-like eyes had ever seen. I don't know how to change the brightness, so I rarely ever use my phone in order to preserve my eyes. After a few minutes of attempting to decipher the time that was lost within this piercing light, I was able to learn that the time was 6:41. I put my phone back inside my pocket and exited my car. The sun was starting to set. The sky was a rich collage of oranges and reds. I wanted to stop and gaze upon this natural beauty before me, but I did not want to be without my McDonald's meal longer than I had to. I walked up to the door and pushed it open. I stepped inside and took a deep breath. The smell of juicy burgers and freshly baked apple pies flooded my nostrils, and my mind began to enter a trance. The feeling of spit dripping down my body was enough to break the spell I was under. Finally, home, I said quietly. I started my journey into this heaven-like place. Half the lights were off, and there was only one other customer there. It was an ancient-looking man dressed from head to toe in black watch plaid. The man looked hypnotized, his dreamy eyes transfixed on his tray. Strangely, the only thing in his tray was a single French fry. It was no ordinary French fry, I quickly deduced. It was abnormally large as 6 cat femurs bundled together. The French fry was also bright yellow. I slowly shifted my gaze away from this sad-looking man and headed towards the counter to place my order. I had never seen the man who was at the register tonight before. He was scruffy-looking. He looked to be in his middle years, but truthfully, he could have been 20 or 70, and I would not have been able to tell by looking at him. I hope you understand. He was wearing a piece of headwear known as a beanie with a bright yellow M on it. A new hire, I thought to myself. I need to make a good impression. I decided to tickle his funny bone by ejaculating the funniest voice I could come up with upon his ears. I continued my way towards the counter. Drip, drip, drip. A leak from the ceiling caught my attention as I grew ever nearer to the man. I stopped my walking because I had reached the counter. I prepared to make my order. Ahem. I cleared my throat in order to make my presence known to the man who had been turned away from the counter at this point. As soon as I made a sound, the man spun around at a lightning speed and glared at me. His filmy orbs pierced my soul, instilling an eerie sense of dread deep within my stomach. I stood silently for 10 seconds before daring to speak again. I began to order. I opened my mouth and the voice that rang from me was oh so funny, so funny. It took all my power just to stop myself from chortling at myself. I began a 10-piece chicken nugget meal with a Fanta, 3 cheeseburgers, and an apple pie and a large chocolate milkshake. The man looked unamused as he took my order. Why, I thought, why isn't he laughing? That always works. I furrowed my brow. This man is the opposite of normal. I began to take out my wallet to pay, but before I was able to reveal the leathery square to the man, he began to speak. Would you like to our new special item? The banana fry. A sinister grin began to form on his oblong face. A banana what now? I questioned. Still doing the voice, I committed myself to hoping still he would find it humorous. The banana fry, he continued. It's made from real bananas. It's really yummy. I promise you've never had anything like it before. The man's grin had morphed into a full tooth smile at this point, his piercing black eyes staring at me. Unblinking. I'll try it, I suppose I muttered. Moments after these words left my mouth, the man let out a howling cackle that echoed throughout the whole restaurant. Even the plaid-coated man's meditative state was disrupted by this horrible sound. The man stopped laughing as suddenly as he had started and told me my total. I quickly paid the fee and walked away. I stood anxiously waiting for my feast. It felt like time had slowed down as I stood there as a stone sculpture stands in a rich man's garden. After this grueling wait, my order number was called. I quickly grabbed my bags and swiftly departed from this once soothing place. I climbed into my car and tried to calm myself down. I was quite perplexed by what had just happened and decided I needed to do something to ease my soul. I shut my eyes and began to do a breathing exercise that my Uncle Ronnie had taught me. Do this when you get scared, pussy. His words rang clear within my mind. In and out, in and out, in and out. I could feel the fear exiting my body. It felt wonderful. All my worries had vanished. I was finally at peace. The odor from my McDonald's had become prevalent in my car. It could feel making its way through my nose holes, tickle each and every nose hair that I called my own. A smile began to form on my face. I let out a small chuckle, and to myself I said, this is what true happiness feels like. I'm sure of it. Suddenly, a loud knocking occurred to my left. I yelped. My heart started to pound rapidly. My peaceful moment had been ended by what I could only assume was a creature with male intent. I quickly opened my eyes and gazed towards the source of the sound. I felt as if my shade had left my body when I looked over, and saw those inky black holes staring at me. Unblinking, staring at me. The McDonald's employee made a gesture with his hands. Confused by this, I rolled down my window and questioned the fiend. "What's with the gang signs, Honcho?" "What?" The man retorted. "I was trying to get you to roll down your window." My response was simple, "I see." 7 seconds of silence passed before the man spoke again. "You dropped this when you left." He slowly handed me his enclosed fist. I carefully unfolded his pale, bony fingers, similar to how a child unwraps their Christmas package. Within his hand, a single quarter lay. I grabbed it and thanked the man, who simply winked in response. He ran back inside, and I thought it best to leave swiftly before anything else happened. I drove faster than I normally do as I headed, my heart still beating from the previous interaction. I reached my home in a decent amount of time and excited my car with my meal. I opened the door of my house, and my nose instantly became infected with the stench of my mother's cooking. I loudly exclaimed, "I'm home," and darted to my room before my family members could react. I scanned my room to make sure nothing had been touched, or God forbid moved. I then Saturday in my vintage yellow McDonald's chair I had found on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. I only sit in this chair when I have McDonald's. I began the ceremony. First I ate all of my French fries. Then I started to eat my chicken nuggets. I ate 5 before stopping. I then devoured 2 of the cheeseburgers. I took a short bathroom break and drank my milkshake and ate my apple pie. I flushed the toilet and returned to my room. I ate the last cheeseburger and 3 more nuggets, chugged my Fanta, and finally ingested the last 2 nuggets. "What a wonderful meal," I exclaimed. This is truly the highlight of my day. As I Saturday there thinking about my meal, I began to smell it. The banana fry. The thought of it had removed itself from my mind, but its now potent odor had reminded me of this odd food. I peered inside the bag and looked at it. Its yellow hue had a soothing effect on my mind. I reached inside the bag and firmly grasped it. I Saturday down on my throne and slowly licked my lips before inserting the yellow object into my mouth. I took a bite and let it sit on my tongue for a minute before swallowing. It was the most delicious thing I had ever had in all my years alive. I devoured the rest of it in no time at all. I leaned back in my chair and laughed to myself. I then maneuvered to my bed and fell asleep. I woke up to the sensation of my mother shaking me vigorously. "It's TV time," she said. "Every day my family, which consists of me, my mother, my uncle, and his male lover, all gather together to watch a bit of television together. We enjoy this activity immensely as it helps us feel connected as a family." My mother and I entered the TV room where my uncle and his lover were already Saturday waiting for us. We all Saturday together on the sofa and held hands. My uncle operated the TV and put on a show called The Boys, one of the funniest shows ever made. We all watched it happily for 25 minutes before I suddenly let out a loud yelp. I fell to the floor and gripped my stomach. The agony I felt in that moment is indescribable. It felt as if I was being bitten by 1,000 fire ants while simultaneously having a rusty knife plunged into my lungs. My family had come down from the sofa and surrounded me, trying to make sense of my sudden change of mood. I screamed and screamed. "What is happening?" my uncle yelled into my ear. My mother ran from the room and returned with a wet rag and placed it on my forehead. After 20 or so minutes, the pain began to subside, and I stopped screaming. My family embraced me and helped me to my feet. They then said to me something horrible. "Your skin," they said in unison. "It's yellow." I had no words. I began to think that this was merely all a dream, and swiftly kicked my uncle's lover in the balls. The man fell to floor and screamed loudly while gripping his family jewels. My uncle's jaw dropped, and he kicked me in the balls as retaliation. I howled loudly, and came to the conclusion that I was in fact not dreaming. Suddenly, without warning, a horn-like deformity erupted from my scalp. I screamed in pain. The pain, I assure you, if you felt it, you would end your own life. My mother then said, "You look like a banana." "What?" I shrieked and jolted to the bathroom to look in the mirror. My reflection was horrifying. My skin was banana yellow. On my head was a banana stem. I felt my skin. Its texture was reminiscent of a banana. I wept. I wept until I could weep no more. And when I could weep no more, I simply sat there in silence. My family stood at the bathroom door and watched. There was nothing they could do but watch. They knew, as did I, that I would soon fully transform. When it is clear that I more banana than man, eat me, dear mother. please, I said solemnly. She nodded and I went to my room, climbed into my bed and entered my final slumber. Epilogue. Uncle Ronnie here. I will now recount the events of the morrow after my nephew's transformation. When we woke up the next morning, he had become a banana. A banana the size of a 5'6" man. We took his body to the kitchen and laid it on the table. We cried together for hours and paid our respects. We then peeled off the exterior of the banana boy and ate him. It took us hours. My sister vomited multiple times. It was the hardest thing any of us had ever had to do, and we hated every moment of it. But we had to do it. I leave you now with a warning. Never eat the banana fry from McDonald's.